Okay? Let's keep going. Yeah, I can. All right. All right, now, these are small. You can't see these. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do my best to kind of share them with you. But I want you to see what's going on here. And Josephus, who was a first century Jewish writer, uses the same exact kind of language as these first and second century writers used in the New Testament. Right? And so when he talks about, when Josephus talks, he says, now it's very hard to reckon up the magnitude and the variety of the royal chambers. He's talking about this palace. Okay? And he says how many rooms there were of the largest sort, how many of a size inferior to those, and how many they were that were subterranean and invisible. So he's talking about this beautiful palace, and it's big, and there's so much to it, it's really hard to really give you a description, he's saying. And then he goes on, the beauty of those that enjoyed the fresh air, right? We will rise up in the air. Same exact word. What is the air? What is the air, not to us, what was it to them? What did air mean to them? When they used that word, what were they talking about? Well, we have a really good clue here because Josephus uses the same. And he says, the beauty of those that enjoyed the fresh air, what is the fresh air, and the groves for the most delightful prospect, for the avoiding the heat of summer and the shading of their bodies. And he's saying that, see, the rich, the wealthy lived on the hills where there was a breeze. It was nice. The poor lived way down in the valleys. And that was the truth, same thing in the city of Jerusalem. The poor lived down in the valley where it was hot and people were just cantankerous. You know, that's where the poor people lived. But the rich people could live up on the hill where the wind was nice. It was cool. Okay? And then going on, he says, now the three bulwarks were easily lifted up because so many hands were continually at work upon it, for it was summertime, and there was nothing to hinder them in raising their works, neither from the weather nor from the workmen. So they brought their engines to bear and shook the walls of the city and tried all manner of ways to get in. Here, he uses the same word to mean weather. So they were up in the weather, where the wind was, and the clouds are, and those kinds of things, like the fog. Okay? So we see this word used again to mean weather. But then when he's talking about Masada, Masada's a palace that was built by Herod to get away. He was kind of paranoid. And speaking of Masada, he says, when the Romans got possession of those fruits that were left, the food that was left in the huge bin, they were like giant hallways where they stored food. And he says, when they got that stuff, he says they were basically not that rotten. They were surprised at how little rot happened after they had been up there trapped for so long. These Jews went up there to hide from the Romans. And he said it wasn't that rotten. He said they found them not rotted all that while, nor should we be mistaken if we suppose that the air was here the cause of their enduring so long. This fortress being so high and so free from the mixture of all earthborn and muddy particles of matter. In the Septuagint, which is a Greek version of the Hebrew Bible, and including the apocryphal writings, it says, this king's talking. He says, I myself also am a mortal man, like to all, and the offspring of him that was first made of the earth, and in my mother's womb was fashioned to be flesh in the time of 10 months, being compacted in blood of the seed of a man, and the pleasure that came with sleep. And when I was born, I drew in the common air. Okay, so just the breath, the air that's around us. And then listen to this about Absalom. This is from 2 Samuel 18:9. He says, now Absalom happened to meet the servant of David, and he was on his horse, and it says he got caught in a tree. And it literally hung him because he was on his horse riding, and the branches grabbed him. And it says it left him trapped between heaven and earth. Now that doesn't mean 2,000 feet in the air, 30,000 feet. It means above the ground. Okay? That's all it means in that passage. Just above the ground. This space. This where we are. The place where we breathe. Now, why in the air? Why is that so important? Well, all the way back to Isaiah, I'm not going to read these to you, but Isaiah 2 and Micah 4, the very beginning of those two chapters, Isaiah 2, 1 through 5, and Micah 2, 1 through 5, are considered a synoptic or one view. In other words, it's probably written by one person and one borrowed from the other to get that word out. Okay? And they're saying in this passage, basically, that in the future, at the end of this age, they call it, that's the Messianic time, when the Messiah comes, they're saying, the mountains of the Lord's temple will be established as chief of the mountains. When the Messiah comes, he will be in the highest mountain. He will be, because they thought of the mountains as the places where gods lived. And pagans said, well, my God lives on the higher mountain than your God. And so they were constantly having these sort of arguments, because at this time when they were writing, the Canaanites are there, the Assyrians are coming, and they have the idea that gods are sort of vying for high spaces. Right? And so they said, but when the Messiah comes, Yahweh will have the highest mountain. Right? It doesn't say he'll be in outer space or be floating up above the clouds. It just says he'll be in the highest mountain. Every mountain will be able to look up and see the mountain of God. Right? And so the idea is that when God is there, he's at the top of a mountain, like Mount Sinai. Okay? Let's keep going. There. Now, katabino and istemi, there's two words. One means to ascend, one means to descend. One means to get up, one means to sit down. Okay? And it says in 1 Thessalonians 4:16, for the Lord himself will descend from heaven. The heaven was, again, that mountain. When Moses went to see God on the top of Mount Sinai, where God was, heaven was. Okay? So when it all came down to it, if you wanted to be, we talked about this I think last week, if you wanted to be on heaven and earth at the same time, you had to be on top of Mount Sinai, where God was at that time. And God hid himself in a cloud. In fact, that started way back in Genesis with the first, what's called storm theophany, where God presents himself as a storm for the first time after the fall, because Adam and Eve had taken fruit and God could no longer be there in his full presence. And he shows up, and the words say, they heard the voice of God coming in the cool of the day. The words in Sumerian, Ugaritic, and Akkadian, they're the similar words in all of those languages, but they don't mean they heard his voice in the cool of the day. They would be translated literally, they heard the thunder of God in the wind of the storm. Because thunder and voice are the same word. Wind and spirit, cool, they kind of borrowed. That was really stretching it. But the wind word is there. And then the day, yom, also means storm. It's a storm. It's for a storm god. The ancient Near Eastern people thought of their gods as storm gods. Even in the Bible, throughout the Old Testament, it talks about God riding on the clouds, coming in the storm. Now, the word that you may remember the phrase, the still small voice. Well, we've pretty much proven now that there's no such thing. That word actually is a misinterpretation. It means a roaring, thunderous voice, not a still small voice. And so, again and again, as we grow and we learn and things keep coming out of these other ancient languages and ancient writings and other biblical writings that keep showing, we're starting to figure things out a little more. We're starting to understand the importance of understanding God as this one who comes in a cloud. He protects. It's mercy and justice